went out to like a dinner afterwards. And that's where Jodi really opened up to the women in a private conversation that she believed she was being tormented and haunted by shadow figures every night. And that was spooky.
A bombshell new lawsuit has just been filed by Kevin Franke, the ex-husband of disgraced YouTuber Ruby Franke, and the allegations are next level. He is accusing Jodi Hildebrandt, the licensed mental health counselor at the center of the child abuse scandal, of emotional manipulation, medical negligence, destroying his family. This legal filing pulls back the curtain on what Kevin claims he endured behind closed doors. And you know what? It may change how we view this already horrifying case. Let's break it all down. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. A major new lawsuit was filed by Kevin Franke against Jodi Hildebrandt, and we're going to talk about it right now. So Kevin is, of course, the ex-husband of former mommy vlogger, YouTuber Ruby Franke. And we know Ruby and mental health counselor Jodi Hildebrandt, her associate, were both arrested and pled guilty to aggravated child abuse of Ruby's 2 young children. It was a horrifying case. Bondage, starvation, physical injuries, emotional abuse, physical labor. Awful, awful. We're talking about these kids being rescued by police after her young son was able to escape and run to a neighbor of Jodi's in Ivins, Utah. Both of these women pleaded guilty. It meant they didn't have to go to trial. It went directly to sentencing in February of 2024. They were each sentenced to 40 to 30 years in prison. It's going to be up to the parole board to decide when they're released. But now we got to talk about Kevin, because Kevin has always maintained he had no idea that this was going on, that he was living separately from Ruby at Jodi's direction, that Jodi had taken complete control over Ruby, manipulated her, and manipulated him, divided their family. So what happens? Not totally unexpected we're seeing this, but Kevin Franke filed this lawsuit in Utah State Court against Jodi Hildebrandt, and that is what we're going to break down. Now, I will tell you, it echoes a lot of the allegations that he has made against Jodi after her and Ruby's arrest, but this is a lot more detailed. So first thing I noticed is that it was filed on his behalf by his attorney, Randy Kester. This is somebody that we have interviewed before here on Sidebar. Okay, this is essentially a medical malpractice-like lawsuit, okay? He's suing for negligence, where someone owes you a duty, they breached that duty, you were harmed, and their actions caused that harm. Those are the kind of elements: duty, breach, causation, harm. Here's what it says in the complaint. Quote, defendant owed Kevin a duty of care as a patient, and in a vulnerable emotional state, she was in a position of trust. Defendant breached this duty of care using improper mental health care techniques as outlined in the paragraphs listed above. And we're going to go through the allegations, but real quick, something to point out. Under Utah law, there are tiers, so depending on how much you're seeking in damages, compensation, that dictates what this case will look like and maybe how long you'll actually get to a trial. Because basically, what we're talking about is how the sides will be able to obtain material and evidence in a case like this, really discovery. So they argue in this complaint, this is a tier 3 case. Franke is claiming that his damages exceed $300,000, which allows for things like 30 hours for total fact depositions, 210 days for standard fact discovery and stuff like that. I don't know, just thought it was interesting. This is a legal show, wanted to point it out. Anyway, I'm gonna get to damages later, by the way, because you might be saying, wait a second, she's locked up in prison. What is he going after? What are her assets? It's a good question, we'll talk about it later. But what are the allegations? So first of all, it gets into how Kevin and Ruby got married. On December 28th, 2000, they had 6 kids, and then they get into how Jodi got connected to Ruby, namely how Jodi engaged Ruby to associate with her in a new Facebook group called Moms of Truth. And Jodi apparently continued to practice as a mental health counselor. And the complaint explains how Jodi and Ruby did social media posts together, and they were designed to promote Jodi's business. And Jodi was creating and selling written materials to promote her business too. This all leads into the allegation that Jodi solicited Ruby and Kevin to be her patients and to buy her books and her workbooks. and how Jodi allegedly referred to herself as a psychologist. And by the way, they cite this in the complaint, how proof of this is from her August 2023 police interview.
The whole reason we're sitting here today is there's a lot of questions we have that we just maybe have misunderstandings that we just need to clarify.
I know, and I'd love to tell you if you were here, because I don't know, I don't know what's going to happen with what I say. You know, I'm a psychologist. I've watched people flip things all the time, so I get it. I sit on your side. I get it.
By the way, if you've been watching Sidebar, you know how many videos we put out every day, every week, even on the weekend, and we use something called Opus Clips. So if you're in the content creation game, if you're putting things out on social media, this might be for you. This is an all-in-one AI editor that makes it easier and faster to cut, create, and upload videos across all social media platforms. Through the power of AI, Opus Clip automatically generates B-roll, it cleans up audio, it reframes your videos for any platform, and Opus Clip is so easy to start using. I'm going to show you how right now. All you got to do is go to opus.pro/sidebar, sign up, and then upload a video. In just a few minutes, you'll have tons of perfectly edited clips ready to go. So whether you're making videos for TikTok, Shorts, Instagram Reels, Opus Clip is your one-stop shop for getting your best content seen by more viewers across all these platforms with the press of just one button. And if you're wondering how good the AI edited videos are from Opus Clip, just look at our content here at Law&Crime. Our producers have used Opus to help us cut and share clips of some of our most major trials, and having a tool like Opus Clip means we can get you even more viral updates from inside the courtroom faster than ever before. At Sidebar, we know our listeners have a lot of opinions and ideas to share, and this is the most powerful tool there is to help you edit like a pro and grow your own audience. So give it a try for yourself. Go to opus.pro/sidebar to start creating your own videos today. Now, this is the big allegation. Quote, during the spring of 2022, Jodi asserted that based upon her experience, education, expertise, and observations as a licensed clinical mental health counselor and psychologist, she, without undertaking any assessments, testing, or other formal diagnostic protocol, advised Kevin that she had diagnosed him as being lustful, narcissistic, manipulative, deceptive, controlling, and selfish, and that he needed her professional services. She also advised Ruby of her diagnosis of Kevin. She convinced Ruby to support this diagnosis and adopt Jodi's subsequent professional advice for remedial treatment for Kevin and his family. Kevin engaged Jodi's professional services. She undertook to provide him professional mental health services and thereby assumed a heightened position of trust as a licensed healthcare professional in the state of Utah with its attendant duties. So that is key to negligence. It establishes the duty that Jodi allegedly owed to Kevin. Quote, her further professional advice was that Kevin should have no communication or contact with his children because Kevin's personality, emotional, and mental health conditions would have a negative impact on the children and might lead them to adopt these same negative behaviors and conditions. This was mandated by Jodi as part of Kevin's treatment. On July 20th, 2022, Jodi and Ruby mandated that as a condition to protect the children and preserve the marriage and family, Kevin and his oldest son, Chad, then 17, should remove themselves from the family home and reside elsewhere and have no communication with the other family members, including Kevin's wife, Ruby. Remember, Chad was actually a patient of Jodi at one point. Quote, at this point, both Chad and Kevin were paying for her professional services and advice, and Kevin was enrolled in her online men's group therapy. In reliance upon her professional status, education, licensing, and experience, and upon Ruby's adoption of Jodi's advice, Kevin and Chad left the home. Now that's key, right? That's key. They're really building that up to say this wasn't a stranger telling them to do this and providing this advice. She, by all accounts, gave her credentials. Why shouldn't she be trusted and believed? That position of trust, that duty, key to a negligence analysis. And this is now where Kevin alleges that Jodi insists that Ruby and Kevin live separately. Actually, by the way, when Kevin was interviewed by police after Ruby's arrest in a later interview, because he was much more on the offensive against Jodi in a later interview, not so much in his initial one, but in this later one, it's important what he says. Take a listen.
Basically, there were all these rules now placed on me, like I could leave when I wanted, but I couldn't come back until Ruby gave me permission. I couldn't come into the kitchen to eat until Ruby gave me permission. And the upstairs where Jodi roamed was completely off limits. I couldn't go upstairs anymore in my own house. And there would be, Ruby would dictate all of the terms of how our interactions would be, when we would talk, and that was hard. And it was during that time that I really became, I would say, dependent upon Ruby. Like, if she said a kind word to me, like, my whole day was made, right?
Very similar to what's being alleged now in the lawsuit, right? So now let's go back to the complaint. Quote, Chad was paying for his weekly therapy sessions, and she actually raised her price for him to approximately $900 per month. Kevin paid Jodi for his participation in online men's group therapy beginning in July 2022. She requested that Kevin pay through Venmo because, quote, it's easier. Kevin paid between $300 and $375 monthly for his participation in men's group therapy. Jodi, knowing of and having observed their family practices and devotion to their religious beliefs and commitments, used her knowledge of Kevin's commitment to his religious beliefs, his marriage and family to leverage and manipulate him into adopting her unprofessional and deceitful advice. Kevin was paying her and relying upon her professional therapy, his objective being to preserve his family and marriage. She would often tell him that unless there was strict compliance with her mandates, that his, quote, soul was in danger of being damned. In addition, during his time of separation, other men Jodi was instructing, who were part of her online therapy, were directed by Jodi to threaten Kevin that if he didn't comply and change quickly, Ruby was going to run out of patience and divorce Kevin. This manipulation made him fear the threatened consequences if he didn't maintain absolute and unquestioning compliance with Jodi's mandates. You know what we call that? Potential witnesses, right? At a trial, would he call these men? Would they testify? That would be huge. Now, Kevin claims that Jodi ordered that he and Ruby have complete separation, that Jodi would emotionally and mentally abuse other patients who violated a no-contact separation. So in other words, if he didn't follow her advice, look what was going to happen. There were, however, a couple times when she did allow Kevin to speak to Ruby, but it wasn't so simple as picking up the phone and saying, hi, no, this is the allegation from the complaint. Quote, each time, Jodi instructed Kevin to write a letter and list everything that he did that he was told by Jodi that was selfish, entitled, narcissistic, lustful, and manipulative. Jodi would tell Ruby to hold on to these letters to use as evidence for leverage in divorce proceedings should that be necessary. Now, I do wonder if there are physical copies of these letters. Are there emails? By the way, I should note something about this case. If this goes to trial, this presumably is going to rely heavily on Kevin's testimony, right? He would presumably have to take the stand. You have to imagine that in this kind of case. And he would face tough questioning from Jodi Hildebrandt's lawyer or lawyers about why he did all this. First, Jodi's lawyers could deny all these allegations, say she never advised any of this, all of this is untrue. Or they could say, look, there was a reason she told them to separate. And it was Kevin who voluntarily consented to doing all this. He's an adult. She provided advice. She didn't pressure him or manipulate him. He did it voluntarily. Not saying, by the way, that that defense would work, but just keep in mind that would be what I imagine cross-examination would look like and what their argument would look like should this go to trial. But when we talk about that, I mean, just listen to what Kevin told police in an initial interview after Ruby's arrest.
Jodi and Ruby have a close relationship, and Jodi saw the need for me to get help. And frankly, I agree. This space has been exactly what I need to face, my own addictions and receive the support and help that I've needed. And so this space has been very, very good for me.
See, so that was very close in time when all of this was allegedly going on and right after the arrest. He has obviously changed his tune about Jodi and Ruby since that time. But could that interview be used by Jodi Hildebrandt's defense to argue consent? Maybe. Which is why, by the way, Kevin, in his complaint, and probably ultimately at a future trial, is really focusing on the alleged mental abuse that he suffered at the hands of Jodi, how she allegedly berated and belittled him during online men's group therapy sessions, that she allegedly accused him of, quote, being a lover of darkness, lover of Satan, and accused him of hiding something very dark and evil, and she withheld her counseling and help unless through coercion He confessed it to her, and she was satisfied that it was all disclosed. Again, this goes to the alleged power imbalance, the credentials, the coercion. This is all important for the purposes of this case. Quote, during these group sessions, totaling over 300 hours, Jodi would electronically, privately communicate with other members of the group and share confidential and detailed information about Kevin, his family, and his struggles. She would then enlist and instruct others using that information to mentally, psychologically, and spiritually abuse Kevin. She would have him called out for his behavior and comments, which she characterized as inappropriate. During her treatment of Kevin, she would also relate to him vivid details of her other patients' lives, activities, and choices. Now, during the course of pretrial discovery, exchanging information and potential evidence, I do wonder if they can get these messages to show she allegedly did this. Right? To be clear, when you file a lawsuit, you aren't claiming you have all the actual evidence to prove your claims as of yet. Many times you have secondhand information, you believe it to be true, but now you need to commence a lawsuit where you can get that potential evidence to prove and corroborate your claim. So then the complaint claims that by September 2022, Jodi had told Kevin he wasn't worthy to enter the temple for the LDS Church, Church of Latter-day Saints. He said this led him to not actually trying to renew his certification to enter an LDS temple. It's called a recommend. He claims she also encouraged him to get fired from Brigham Young University, BYU, that it would wake him up if he was fired. And he claims that's what happened. He was fired. And then he alleges when that happened, when he was fired, Jodi turned on him, called him selfish for doing this. So then finally we get into when Ruby and two of her kids were living with Jodi in this house in Ivins. He claims Jodi never told him this. And by the way, he alleges that Jodi told Ruby to get tested for STDs, okay? And he says while all this is going on, by the way, he's still paying for Jodi for these professional services. He's thinking that these counseling sessions would lead to reunification of the family. But this is important. He claims, what was Jodi doing? That she was allegedly trying to convince Ruby to buy up land, property in Arizona, to liquidate these financial accounts that were for Ruby, Kevin, and their children in the sum of $80,000. By the way, kind of similar to what Kevin told police back in the day in that later interview I mentioned.
Around that time, things with Ruby started picking up, and I didn't understand why, but Ruby wanted to meet in a parking lot and wanted me to sign over titles of documents. The two of our cars wanted me to sign them over to her name. And
To Ruby.
Mm-hmm. But I was like, okay, I'm just not, I'm in total compliance mode at this point. Just I'm a good husband, you see, you can trust me. And so whatever she asked, sign over the cars to me, no questions, just okay. And then another thing, she was like, I might want to do an investment, but I will need your signature. Do you trust me enough that I could get your signature if I wanted to pursue my own investment? Yeah, sure. Whatever you say.
Okay, so from there, Kevin claims that Jodi suspended her services with Kevin, that he had his last men's group session on July 26, 2023, and this is while she was mentally, emotionally, and physically abusing his two children in that Ivins house. So then we get to two important parts of this lawsuit. And the first one says this, quote, the specific allegations of negligence, which are believed to be below the standards of mental health care for this community include, but are not limited to, the following, and it's a full list. Failure of Jodi Hildebrandt to professionally diagnose and explain to patient from what specific mental health condition he suffered and how such diagnosis warranted the applied treatment. Failure of Jodi Hildebrandt to institute an appropriate remedial method of treatment. Affirmatively misdiagnosing this patient's condition. Affirmatively acting to apply unprofessional, inappropriate, and improper methods of treatment within the applicable standard of care. Engaging in dual conflicting relationships with patient, members of his family, and other patients. Engaging in acts detrimental to patient's children contrary to the stated objective of the purported professional advice and services being provided to and paid for by patient. Committing criminal acts against patients' children, disclosing Kevin's confidential information and communications to and providing advice to patient's wife, contrary to patient's best interests and contrary to the stated objective of the purported professional advice and services being provided to and paid for by patient, engaging in conduct toward her patient that displayed a lack of honesty and candor, was dishonest and designed to benefit the self-interest of Ms. Hildebrandt, and was contrary to the mental health and best interest of her patient, representing herself to be practicing or engaging in a profession, psychology, for which she was not licensed, engaging in conduct that resulted in a conviction with respect to a crime that, when considered with the functions and duties of the profession for which the license was issued, there is a substantial relationship to the licensee's ability to safely or competently practice the profession. Engaging in conduct that has resulted in disciplinary action, including suspension and revocation by the licensing and regulatory authority under the Division of Professional Licensing for the state of Utah for a licensed clinical mental health counselor. Practicing a profession regulated under Utah state law through gross incompetence, gross negligence, or a pattern of incompetency or negligence. Practicing or attempting to practice a profession requiring licensure under this title by any form of action or communication which is false, misleading, deceptive, or fraudulent, verbally, physically, mentally, or sexually abusing or exploiting any person through conduct connected with the licensee's practice under this title or otherwise facilitated by the licensee's license. By the way, you remember when I said that Franke was paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month for these online group therapy sessions and was doing it through Venmo? That last part is very, very important for purposes of damages, compensation. How much was he essentially owed because of what Hildebrandt did to him? How can he be restored whole? So in fact, towards the end of this lawsuit, this complaint, Kevin Franke alleges what he suffered and what he is seeking, that he was subjected to unnecessary and damaging mental health treatments, that he paid for all of this. Monetary damages for past, ongoing, and future mental health treatment because of what Jodi allegedly did. General damages for things like physical and emotional pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, depression, attorney's fees, costs, therapy costs, lost earnings. Cites damages in trying to reconcile and restore his family to what it was before Jodi did what she allegedly did, and any and all other appropriate damages. Now, Utah may put a cap on certain damages, but you're still talking about what could be a very sizable number if this goes to trial. And by the way, Kevin is demanding a jury trial for this case. And here's something else to remember. We can't tell you what Hildebrandt's current financial condition is or what her assets are. However, 2 News Investigates out in Utah reported that her $5 million home in Ivins, where the abuse of those children occurred, was taken off the market. Also, it was alleged in another lawsuit against Hildebrandt, one that we discussed here on Sidebar, filed by a man named Michael Tillman, that he was victimized by Hildebrandt through her connections business. And this part is key. Quote, the enterprise has become a multi-million-dollar operation by fraudulently luring individuals to the enterprise through connections and then charging them exorbitant amounts of money under the threat of pain, abuse, and destruction of one's family if the individuals do not fully invest in connection services and products and the enterprise itself. So in Kevin's litigation, there will possibly be an examination of the profits that Jodi potentially earned from her services, and it goes to the harm and damages analysis. And I will tell you, look, based on what we have seen in the criminal case, Ruby's own statement when she was sentenced, talking essentially how she was manipulated by Jodi, Kevin's own statements to police, analyzing the credibility of his allegations in this lawsuit is very, very different than if he had just filed this suit before Jodi's arrest and we never heard about any of this. So does it make it more credible? Maybe. So depending on Jodi's assets and a risk-loss analysis, she's got to decide if she wants to fight this and if she contends the allegations are untrue or if she's going to try to work for a settlement of some kind. We'll wait and see. Interesting development nonetheless. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.